Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to our best practices panel discussion today as part of our education program here at Fabtech. My name is David Hernandez. I'm the Director of Educational Development for the American Welding Society, and I have three distinguished individuals here who have dedicated some of their time to come and speak with us today. So I'd like to start off by having each one of them introduce themselves.
I'm Brian Chin. I work at Auburn University. I head up the materials engineering program at Auburn University.
I'm Ed Norman. I teach welding technology at the Southwest Area Career Center in Monette, Missouri, 27 years.
I'm Brandon Mulebrandt. I'm a training specialist for the Lincoln Electric Company based out of Mobile, Alabama. And other part I'm kind of known for is being one of the past medal winners to the Skills USA International Program. Silver medal 1995, Lyon, France.
Great. Well, I'd like to start off with a very simple question. We heard our award winners today all speak, and for the most part, they all talked a little bit about how they entered into the field of welding. So I kind of like to hear your story at the beginning, you know, just hear how you got into welding, why you chose this career field, and go from there. Professor Chin.
Wow. Actually, out of high school, I went to what is known as the Lando Junior College at that particular point in time. And I took some shop courses, believe it or not, and got started actually working with the welding process that way. I then went on to Florida State University. Actually, I probably wasn't a very good student. It took me 9 colleges or community colleges that I attended before I got my bachelor's degree at Auburn University. Then I went out for advanced training at out in California. Took a job with Westinghouse Hanford Company, welding in the materials area. One of the areas that we dealt with was welding of stainless steels and things of that nature. Then back to the Department of Energy in Germantown, Maryland, and then Auburn University, where I have been with the engineering, mechanical engineering department now for 31 years. So that's how I got started in welding.
That's the brief version.
I was born and raised on a farm in central to southern Missouri. And my father retired from his job and decided to move to Monette, which is in the southwestern corner of the state. And this was in the middle of my sophomore year in high school. And I was a FFA student back at Stockton, and sold the farm. We moved to Monette and enrolled in high school. And they had no BOAG program. So, having been raised on a farm and involved with FFA, I was a little bit discouraged with that. But the good news that came out of that was the fact that I had enough additional credits, high school credits, in line for graduation that they allowed me, and it was fortunate that they housed a local vocational technical school. They bused in 15 high schools to this facility. So they let me tour that and said I could take a vocational class as a sophomore, which is highly unusual, or at least in our state. And so I toured the entire facility and I chose the welding program. And so I basically almost spent 2.5 years in that class. And later on was asked to come back and teach some evening classes for them. And then I was asked to teach full-time for them. And 27 years later, here I am.
I got my start, I think it was coming out of 8th grade and going into freshman year of high school. And me and my dad, we went on a family trip up to Hayward, Wisconsin to go visit some family members and I just kind of get away and so forth. I'm born and raised in St. Pete, Florida. and so on. I should have said that first. But we went on a family trip up in Hayward, Wisconsin, and while we was up there, the family that we was with, they're into excavation and buying old dump trucks, and that's maybe been crashed in the front, crashed in the back, taking the two pieces, putting something together and making one. And when I was up there, Roy Watts was about to do some welding on a truck over, like the cab protector on the dump truck and so on. And he said, "Brandon, I'm fixing to do some welding. Have you ever seen it before?" And I said, "No, I've never seen this." And he said, "Well, come on." So we got up in the dump truck, and Roy was wearing a pair of shorts, no shoes, no shirt, holding a weld in the hood. And I didn't know what he was doing at the time, but as I started watching, I noticed he was welding 60-10 weld on the top of it, and I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And then, so going into high school at the time, thank goodness they had the trades program was still up and going. So my freshman year of high school, I inquired about getting into the trades and jumping into the welding program, and was able to get into that. And because there's only one slot, as far as traditionally, they wouldn't take the high school students or freshmen into the welding program until they were at least a sophomore. Was able to somehow get into it. But anyways, they found a slot for me. I actually was in an advanced class. So I was kind of in and around a bunch of the good guys and so on, and just kind of took to the welding and fell in love with it. Second year into it in the high school, I got into all the competitions, and kept on moving forward with going to the state competitions, nationals, and so on through the rest of the high school program and years. And ended up, I think the year I graduated, I got I went through all the international pretrial competitions. Was able to place high enough to be selected to represent the United States in Lyon, France. Went and did that, came home with a silver medal. From there, I got a job offer with Hobart Institute. I spent 5 years at Hobart Institute as a traveling instructor, doing specialized training and so forth. Wanted to do something different, moved down to Mobile. And I work for Ron Pierce. Some of you guys might know him at Wesco as a training specialist. Sales support, so did a lot of work along the Gulf Coast with the shipyards, fab shops, and aerospace industry down that way, doing like cost reductions all the way to process training. And then in 2006, 2004, I think it was, I ended up going to work for Lincoln Electric, and pretty much been there ever since. And currently I work in Mobile. Once again, back in the training and education side of things. I do the specialized training for end users, contractors, and then I also still stay very involved with the Skills USA programs, state, national, and international level.
Something I wanted to mention that he did not want to say because he is such a humble individual is that Mr. Ed Norman is also the chairman of the AWS Education Committee. So he's responsible for putting together all 4 days of this program that you guys have experienced, well, what you've experienced thus far and what you will experience tomorrow and the day after. It's been my experience that anytime I speak to instructors at any level, they could always look back and identify one teacher in their lives that made that difference. Who was that teacher for you, and why were they able to connect with you in ways that other teachers weren't? I want to start with that.
Well, it would have to be most of the people that you talk to. It's usually the classes back in high school that you enjoyed the most is where you're going to find that person. With me, I had more than one, but the single most inspirational instructor or high school teacher that I had was hands down my welding instructor when I first walked into that classroom as a sophomore. You have to understand, when I said it earlier that it was unusual in our state to get accepted as a sophomore. It's a 2-year program. And so I was welcomed with open arms, and I was taught right alongside the junior class. And it was just a thoroughly genuine attitude, conception type issue where he wanted to make sure, it was no doubt in anybody's mind, he wanted to make sure that each of us was brought to whatever level of our potential we had. And that's what I appreciate the most.
Mine's pretty much a lot like Ed's too. I have two instructors. As I was going through a weld program, John Stiles and Jerry Gallion. And I think first and foremost, not only were they good welding instructors, they were passionate about what they did, and at the same time, not only were they instructor and everything else, but they was a friend. So if you had a problem with high school homework or other classes and stuff like that, they would take the time to actually make sure that you understood the other classes and the other programs, math questions, stuff like that. And I remember John Stiles I had a problem with math classes and figures and so on, and the one time I was trying to figure out whatever the problem might have been. But John Stiles, he said, hey, grab a knee, and we're down there on the concrete, and he's got a piece of soapstone, and he's doing some little lines and figures and running some pipe and so on. And he asked me, how do I get from point A to point B, and I was able to answer it. And basically, when it was all said and done, he put it into a perspective to where he helped me answer the math questions that was on the test. So he was able to be, as a friend, an instructor, but he was actually able to turn something into a manner to where I could relate, I could understand, and I can put it towards something that I'm comfortable with. So I'd say as my two instructors, Jerry Gallion and John Stiles, Jerry Gallion's the one that went to France with me, kind of tuned in the skills and all that kind of stuff. We were ready to represent the U.S. But the two instructors I had at the time was John Stiles and Jerry Gallion.
Professor Chin?
Well, that's a very unusual question to ask, but there is one individual that really turned me around. This is happening later in life, after I had completed my bachelor's degree and was off to graduate school. The person was Guy Marsh Pound, one of my former advisors. I'd just gone through the major acceptance examination for the university and had failed it miserably. And I went into my advisor and said, hey, I'm going to go ship off and join the Navy and join their submarine program. And he sort of looked at me and sort of laughed and says, how many Oriental guys do you know that are Navy guys? And this was during the Vietnam War too, okay, towards the end of it. So he said, how many Chinese guys do you know in the Navy? And I started thinking about that. It's just, oh, there must be some guy somewhere. Anyway, the bottom line was that he told me that just because I had failed that one examination miserably, that he thought it better for me to continue on and suck it up and go back and try again. I wouldn't be here now without that advice.
Very good. We all teach at different levels, you know, in the industry, different groups of people in the welding industry. But the challenges that are facing the welding industry right now affect all of us equally. You know, we're seeing an average of 50,000 welders retire a year, but we're only seeing about 25,000 new welding students enter into the industry every year. What are you doing now to try to generate interest in your welding program? I know Brandon works very closely with Skills USA, so I'd like to start off with him and talk about some of the things that you're doing to generate interest in welding and that can be used by instructors to draw kids into their classroom.
Questions are easier to answer when Ed goes first, but kind of knowing that the average age of the workforce right now is 54, and what's leaving the trade is not filled with what's coming into the trade. It's an uphill battle as far as trying to convey the message to the youth and all that kind of stuff about the opportunities in welding and so on. And I think a couple years back we made a comment, or we were trying to figure out how do you recruit, how do you get the word out, who's our #1 competition when it comes to recruiting and so on. So you go back and you start thinking about it, who has the best recruiting program on a national level or even a global level. And you probably go back and you think, and you can probably come up with a whole bunch of different things and so on. But I think if you really think about it, you'll come back and you'll say the military has the best recruiting opportunities and getting the words out and so on. And the reason why is because it's a tradition. fathers were in the military, sons, and so on and so on. And it's kind of accepted as that's the way to go, and that's what you need to do, and so on. Then when you talk about the trades, the perception that we've got is on our back in the dirts, breathing in smoke and all that kind of stuff, and most people accept that as being the reality of a welder. And so what we're trying to do now is just kind of hone in on knowing who is the competition. We want people to go into the military, but also when they get out of the military, know what the different options are and so on. And there's a bunch of programs for that, from like helmets to hard hats, VIP programs, and stuff of that nature that you guys are aware of. But then at the same time, as we start going into the different high schools and colleges and so forth, and the skills programs that we deal with and so on, not only do we try to connect with the students, but we try to connect to the guidance counselors, administrators, but first and foremost also is the parents. Every event that we do like the skills competitions and so on, we're seeking out the parents, trying to find out where they are, who they are, and let them know what kind of opportunities are out there for their children and so on. Because if the parents support it, and they buy into the thought of going into the trade and so on, it's a lot easier for the kids to accept it.
What are you telling the parents?
Run. We just talk, it's like the career path tree. I think everybody's seen the career path trees. When you think of welding, don't think of just a maintenance welder working in a junkyard and so on. You've got different areas of this trade to get into, whether it be engineering to QC to instruction to sales, technicians and so on. I mean, there's a whole gamut of different opportunities with the welding field and the trade itself. But I can assure you this, none of it is possible unless you have the basics, unless you have a little bit of an understanding or a basic introduction to welding itself through a high school, through a college, or something like that. How can you be an engineer and not have a concept of what welding is or what stick welding is and so on? You've got to start somewhere, and you've got to have the basics.
How do you use the skills competitions to help drive that?
We got state levels. State levels, we pretty much bring in all the top schools from around the state itself. So we basically try to showcase. We put all the weld samples out, let the kids see what's all being done and so on. But we do a lot through, like for instance, like Georgia or Alabama or Florida and so on. We do a lot through the Georgia, Florida, Alabama skills websites. And we kind of let the public know what's coming about, who the audience will be, the vendors that will be there. Feel free to ask questions and so on. We try to get all the skilled trades involved with it to where they can also take part and be there to answer questions for people and so on. But we also position ourselves to where we're working with the highest volume areas when possible. For example, me and Ed both sit on the National Welding Committee. Kansas City, those of you guys that have been there before, the Nationals, that brings in the top 5% of that school year. That top 5%, I think they've got the numbers up somewhere like 7,500 students and administrators under one roof at one time, all competing to try to see who the best of the best is on a national level. Well, we're there, and there's times we'd rather be home and doing something different, but we position ourselves to get where we can impact the most people as possible.
Right.
Now, I hope you don't expect me to remember all three of those questions that you asked, but back to the recruiting thing, I think that was the first one. How do we get kids in our program? And my life has been blessed in so many different ways, and one of those ways is that I've never in 27 years had an enrollment issue. And I don't know if it's because of what we've done in the past and continue to do. First and foremost, I firmly believe that my biggest recruiters are my current students in my class right now. They're going to go back to those 15 sending high schools that bus into us, and they're going to tell, and it doesn't make any difference if it's welding class or culinary arts, they're going to tell other students what we do in these classes and also the opportunities that they have looking forward. We also give a lot of information out. We bring 8th graders in. Many people still think that middle school age, 7th grade, 8th grade is where the road lies. And which way are you going to go? Well, the truth of the matter is, and I'm sure Dr. Chin has more statistics on it than I do, that pathway changes sometimes many times throughout one's lifetime. So those 8th grade students come through and we try to disseminate stuff that the American Welding Society, through their foundation, has promotional CDs and literature, things like that, that not only the student can see, but the students and their guidance counselors as well, but they can also take it home, like Brandon said, and their parents can see what it's all about. Also, before school even starts, the week before school even starts, we have a mandatory meeting with all new students and their parents or guardian. And everybody comes in, and the syllabus is handed out. So everybody knows what to expect, and my expectations are pretty high. So it's one of those things, and it's just like Brandon said, the more people you can communicate your expectations to, I just think it gets the point across that much more.
Professor?
I look at this in a little bit different fashion. I'm a believer strongly in the capitalistic system. Time and time again, you know, we look at enrollment figures in the different areas of engineering, for instance, mechanical, chemical, welding engineer, metallurgical engineer. There are some universal trends that I seem to think are associated that have happened over the 30+ years that I've been in Auburn University. If your enrollment goes sky high like it has in mechanical engineering right now, you can predict in the future, 5 or 6 years out, that the salaries for mechanical engineers will drop. If you look why the enrollment has gone up that year, it's generally because mechanical engineering has become rated at the top of all jobs. So while all the things that we do to advertise our field and to make careers known to people, I think money really speaks. And so, you know, if that job opportunity, welder, pipe welder, making $75 an hour, appears on the internet as a top job, we're going to see an influx of people coming into the pipe welding area. So I really do think that a lot of the things that we see in terms of enrollments and are really dictated by our capitalist system, and of course that's the most efficient way of allocating resources, and I think that that's pretty well shown, you know, comparing us with the former Chinese system and the former Russian Soviet system.
Dave, can I add just one
Yeah,
thing?
absolutely.
About the skills component, Brandon alluded to being in Kansas City each year for the National Skills USA contest. And we have gathered in one area the top 5% of the what we call student welders out there. And it's not just he and I. It's a large group of people that's dedicated their lives to doing this. But I just want to make a point that we don't just try to concentrate on that top 5%. That's what we have there, and we try to move the best of the best forward, like Brandon said. But don't be mistaken. We deeply care about the remaining 95% that's out there. So it's one of those things where are these kids getting a job? Are they going to work? Or are they continuing their education? You know, our concern is not just with that 5%. That's where the audience is. But trust me, at the bottom of our heart, we're thinking about that other, not what's going on with that other 95%.
Yeah, that top 5%, if you think about a pyramid, we're with the top 5%, but what story do they tell when they go home? They'll be the ones that reach all the kids that we can't on the travel side. And that's why we try to focus on the big areas and so on, the pyramid. If we can hit the top, we know the ones that we can't get to and so on, hopefully will be taken care of by the individual that we have come in contact with.
I think things like the Skills USA contests are great motivators for kids, you know, because you're really eliminating the thing about school that they don't like, which is that it's not fun. You're adding an element of fun back into the education, you know, practice. And so things like that are good motivators to get them interested in doing it and really working at a level that grades are really never going to motivate them to work at. So I really see that as being one of those things that can be easily implemented in every welding classroom, and they can have huge payoff for the instructor. And if those kids work hard enough, it could be a huge payoff for those students.
Oh, absolutely. One of the biggest concerns I've always had, and that is, we get students. We don't pick and choose our students. We're public education. We take all. And one of my biggest concerns and is those students that I have that perform extremely well in the lab, but can't read. Now when I say can't read, I don't mean can't read proficiently. I mean can't read, can't do math, can't read a tape measure, and we get them again as a junior in high school. And of course, one of the first group of people that we would like to blame is the math teacher and the science teacher and the reading teacher from second grade on. Really, that's all irrelevant. Now that student is a junior in high school that's going to graduate in a couple of years, and what are we going to do? Well, how are we going to best suit or take care of that student into the workforce? So we have a lot of challenges that we face, but some of those students do a wonderful job in the lab, but for whatever reason, handicap, whatever, they're never gonna, Dr. Chin's probably never gonna see that side. But that doesn't mean that they can't be productive citizens in this country. So.
I want to jump to something that Dr. Chin talked about in his lecture earlier today that really made me think about this in a completely different way. You mentioned how the funding crisis in this nation has really changed the way that we educate the welding workforce, in that less and less universities and colleges are having welding programs or maintaining welding programs, and much of that burden is falling to the trade schools. You know, my question is, how do the trade schools have to adapt now? How do they have to evolve now that this is occurring? What do they need to do to better prepare these individuals to enter into the welding industry now that we don't have that system taking them all the way through a 4-year degree?
Well, I really think it again boils down to economics and the allocation of resources. I firmly believe that once pipe welder reaches the top of the pay scale, we'll have the proper talent and labor that would like to become pipe welders. Okay, and shall we say, the public education system will not be able to respond. But these individuals will pay to get the proper education that they need. And the quickest and most expedient way to get there is through our skill-oriented institutions or schools. So I do believe that they will see demand increase, according to the economics.
Is there anything they need to do, though, to change their system, the way they're teaching, any skill sets that need to be added into those curriculums or into those classrooms to better prepare them now that there's not that continuation beyond there, knowing that once they complete that skill training, they're going to be in the workforce and they'll probably be in the workforce for the rest of their lives?
I do think we see changes in trends, as I showed there. Basically, welding metallurgy and basic metals properties were courses that were much more in demand over the past few years. So I think we have people looking into that, and of course the welding certification courses were also under heavy demand, according to my analysis of the data that the Hobart Institute provided to me.
Yeah. The Visions of Welding report that came out in 2009 mentioned something very similar. It said that in many ways, in order for welding to continue to grow, the art of welding needed to be replaced by the science of welding. How do you see that working in your classroom, Ed?
Well, do you mean how do we get the student to realize that science is?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, it used to be, 20-some years ago, it used to be, well, you can teach them a little bit of math in welding class, and that'll help us on the academic side. But when they are running a stick electrode, and we try to teach them about the chemical composition of the flux that's on that stick electrode, when we teach them and explain to them, or take them on a field trip to an air separation plant and let them see how they draw off the different shielding gases and put them in storage containers, things of that nature. And somebody mentioned it 2 or 3 times today, seeing that light bulb go off in their head. You can see it happen. It's not just when a student makes an excellent looking weld. It's when that student realizes the science that's involved or the math that's involved. Brandon gave an example a while ago about drawing some pipe runs on the floor. If you think about some of that pipe thing, that student's doing trig. The issue is he or she doesn't know at the time they're doing trig. After they do it, you explain to them they've done a trigonometry problem, then they're like, "You're kidding me, really?" And so I think anytime that we can apply something, like Brandon said earlier, if we can apply science, if we can apply math to our field, then I just think that that's going to open up the thought process of the student.
I have a comment outside here, the discussion we're having. I do believe that the incorporation of science, and particularly simulation, into what we're teaching could very quickly increase the skill set. We don't need to start off by striking an arc, okay? Manual manipulation, computer simulation of that, video games development where you develop the hand-eye coordination, relationship between heat input and the weld bead formation. These things can all be simulated. What we particularly at the university have learned is that the students are very much advanced with video games and with using computers, with teaching themselves software and this type of interaction because of all the Xboxes and things of this nature. So I know some of the Lincoln Electric and Hobart are working on these weld simulators. And that's probably one way that we can get into this heavily and reduce cost and reduce the time required to educate and train a student.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the virtual reality machine? Because I received a report, I'm going to say 2 or 3 months back, that was done about the Lincoln virtual reality machine, and it showed that students that were trained on the VR machine and students that were trained on live arc machines independently had the same results in the end. That the VR machine was so close to being real welding that they were able to pick up a stick after that and weld comparable to students who had been welding on a stick all along. And so that's one of the things that I was inferring with this question, is how that science of welding is being pushed to the forefront. Not just because it's a high-tech machine, but because when you're in that simulation, you see so many different variables that that you can correct in an instant, as opposed to having to wait to have a weld critiqued by an instructor after it's complete.
Yeah, with the Vertex unit, it kind of gives you the option to hit the reset button and start all over again. So that's kind of nice. And some of the other machines and stuff like that, and technology that's out there, I mean, you have different stuff like production monitoring. You've got the Vertex, and you got weld scores and so on, to where more intelligence is going into the power sources to help train or educate the students on the do's, the don'ts, the discontinuities, the defects, the corrections, and so on. So even with that, the downfall on some of this stuff is a lot of the schools might not have the budget to purchase a piece of equipment like that. I think the Vertex unit, you can't quote me because I'm not in sales, so it's I don't know if it's like $30,000-$40,000, something like that, but it's, yeah, I was thinking
Probably about 50.
All right, I was trying to be a little bit more gentle, but
$6,000 a year annually.
yeah, it's expensive. And so when the instructors with a limited budget are looking at, okay, I'd like to buy that, but that's a lot of steel and a lot of electrodes I could buy over a 4 or 5 year period. The Vertex unit's not for everybody. It's there for a lot of people, but then you've got other options, such as some other pieces of equipment that might have production monitoring type things, or weld score type programs and so on, to where now you're sitting about under the $10,000 range, things that can be brought in for training aids for educators and so on. But even at that, I think having a good relation with local industry, field trips, stuff of that nature, getting the exposure to the students as far as different things that's out there. And even if you don't have the equipment and the power sources to have all the different teaching aids and so on, start teaching some of the stuff as far as deposition rate, cost reductions of welds and so on. What is deposition? What is travel speeds? How does it all play a cost into the weld and so on? You can do all that on paper. And there's formulas and formats and programs that are cheap, if not very inexpensive, that you can do. So now you're teaching the costing side of a weld. I just welded 30 foot of weld on this joint, but I over welded it by 1/16 of an inch, whatever the case might be. How much did I just cost the company? The bottom line is you have to teach the next generation as far as how to reduce costs, increase productivity, making the welder known that he is the first in line in the inspection process. If he knows the weld didn't go in right, he's got to have the common sense to pull it out, fix it, and so on, to where we can keep the cost down for the companies and industry and so on. If we don't, we lose the work. And if we lose the work, then we've got an even bigger problem at hand as well. The schools and training centers that I get around and so on, that might be budget limited as far as what they can do every year and so on. They get their students the basics, and then they send these kids to a job site, and then from there it's up to the job sites to actually train the individuals to get them up to speed for their applications. The skilled trades is a great place for a student to come out of a high school or college program, to go into a 4 or 5 year apprenticeship program and so on, to kind of tune in, take it the next step and so on. A lot of other companies and so on, if they come out of a high school or college, they go to work. The companies themselves are starting to invest more time in specialized training and training on that company site and so on, to get the individuals up to speed. But you got to be careful about that, because if the companies start looking at the dollars and cents and how much money is going into training these individuals that they feel as though was never trained properly to start with, and they start realizing that cost is too expensive and so on, the next thing you know, that company goes overseas or to Mexico and so on, and then everybody's out. So it's like everybody has to kind of jump in, and if your budgets aren't there to buy some of the higher end Vertex units or something of that nature, you have to find other ways to be creative to try to get the same message across to the students.
It's not just about teaching how to burn a shielded metal arc electrode, or pulling a trigger on a MIG gun. It's if you have a large project and the drawings, the contract documents call for example 3/16 fillet welds, and that project gets, and then we go in as an inspector, as a CWI, and we inspect it, and they're 1/4-inch fillet welds. Well, we've just overwelded this entire project by 25%. The entire project's been overwelded by 25%. So imagine the cost, the time. So it's not just about teaching these kids how to burn a stick electrode anymore. It's so much more than that. Budgets is an issue. Extremely fortunate in Southwest Missouri. We've got an excellent advisory committee with industry personnel that's willing to give us their scrap metal, even the money that they get for their scrap metal, because that is, when these companies sell their scrap, that's an income to the company. If they donate their scrap to you, that's a tax write-off if you write them a letter of donation. So there's ways to get around it, but you know, there's the components is changing. Technology-wise, you mentioned the Fabtech. I hope I don't ruin one of your next questions, but try to think outside the box a little bit. Make these students feel like you're at their level. These students today are so tech proficient, it's amazing. My granddaughter can work my cell phone better than I can, and that's great. But so there's ways in the classroom that you can let them use their cell phone. There's programs on the internet that doesn't cost you a dime, that you can ask test questions on the projector and have them text the answer to you. Do some things that's out of the box, and some of you might think is crazy, but you will grab their attention quicker if you do stuff like that. Flip cameras, iMovie, many things that they can video someone else running that 7018 vertical up, T-joint, whatever, and then bring it in the classroom, put it up on the projector, and then let's have a discussion about it.
Absolutely. It's something that I see occurring all around us. I have a 3-year-old son who just entered into school for the first time, and I remember thinking to myself, he's had a computer in his room since he was 2 years old. He knows how to work everything on there. He knows how to get on YouTube and watch his videos. He knows how to, he knows how to work the TV better than my parents do. How is he ever going to look at a blackboard? How's he ever going to look at a blackboard and feel satisfied? So,
anymore.
I'm sorry?
They don't make them anymore.
They don't make them anymore, yeah. That's what my next question is really about. Is Dr. Chin mentioned in his lecture, technology has drastically changed the classroom right now. How do you see technology changing welding education over the next 5 years? Where are we going, and how do we prepare for that? Dr. Chin.
Well, first of all, simulation, I think is, we've already gone that way in the engineering area. And so I think simulation and skills training is a big thing, as we've been talking about. All our classrooms are Wi-Fi, so that the student can instantaneously go out and search for a problem or an answer to a problem. You can go out and pull down videos of how other people have done it. This should be brought into the skills training area. Okay, the more that we can get the students to utilize computers, to see how computers can help them to do the economic calculations on, just if the guy overwelds, like you were talking about, by 25%, what does that cost? We have got to utilize these technologies, and to the students really are quite adept at them. So instructors must bring those things into the class somehow.
Ed?
Well, I'm proud to say that that our home high school is the first high school in the state of Missouri to purchase all their high school students a laptop. Joplin, Missouri was hit by a devastating tornado, and some people in Dubai donated them all laptops, and we partnered with Apple and spent about $750,000 so that all of our high school students could have laptops. And we're all wireless as well. So as Dr. Chin said, these publishing companies are eventually going to quit publishing textbook, hard copy textbook. It's going to be all research based, all instantaneously on the web. They can find whatever we ask them to do and probably do it in a more effective manner than it's ever been done before. I also believe that we're going to see more people step to the plate on simulation. But I also see that the power sources that we continue to have to use on the job is going to get more and more user-friendly, as well as the consumables that we use with those power sources. So I see great things coming down the road. It's hard to look into the future and the crystal ball and think, what's going to come next. But who knows? I think it's a good thing, though.
Best I can do it. To me, that's a hard question to answer as far as what's being asked, because as you look at things on a national level and a broadband, every region, every territory, every school district, every instructor has all got their own issues that they got to deal with, whether it be budgetary, and geographics of the area, what kind of industry is in your hometown, and so on and so forth. So I too, I'm all for the simulated welders. I'm all for next generation welders that have production monitoring capabilities and so on. The advanced processes, robotics, and so forth. But every area has got to be looked at individually on its own criteria and so on. I think it's up to, which I've also heard a good bit this week as well, but it's up to the instructor or instructors, administrators, guidance counselors, and so on, to build the relation with the local industry, see what they're actually working on or the projects that they're dealing with and so on. And as an instructor, your job is to try to produce the best trained, most efficient welder that you can possibly turn out in the short amount of time that you've got to work with them. And your job is to be as creative with the tools that you can come across and type of equipment and so on that you can come across to actually work with in your program. I agree with everything everybody's saying as far as type of machines and simulators and all that, so don't take it I'm not. But for everything that I see on a national level, there is no smoking gun answer as far as how to fix a lot of the issues and the problems and so forth that we see. How do we turn out more efficient welders, high trained, quality driven, so on and so forth. It all starts with the educators. It all starts with the high school instructors. It starts with the community college or vocational center instructor and so on. That helps kind of set the stage, build the foundation for the individuals to kind of build off of from there on out.
I agree, and I think in part it's an issue where even when the technology exists, there's a lot of implementation, but not a lot of integration. I recently, a couple years ago, went back to my alma mater, and they had all these new smart boards put in all the rooms, that you can get up. It's basically like a projector, but it's interactive with the computer, and they replaced their whiteboards with them. Except that you'd walk into half the classrooms and the teachers were just using it as a whiteboard, and so you had all this technology there, but you also had a group of instructors who weren't ready to integrate it. So how do you do that? How do you integrate new technologies into what you do? Because I think that there's a lot of stuff out there that exists that can be easily integrated, and some of it we're going to talk about tomorrow in the education program. So I encourage you all to come back tomorrow and take a look at those presentations, because there's a wealth of free resources out there, but it almost seems like there's a hesitation by some instructors to do it. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Well, as I mentioned in my lecture this afternoon, lifelong learning has become a very large part of what we do. In other words, training individuals to teach themselves and to find the information that they need and to then incorporate it into their particular job. I know many of the companies these days have written procedures for the different operations which are done across the company. So, you know, one of the things that I have my students do is we take some welds which are produced by a local company, we bring them in, and then we basically ask the students to test these things or these parts according to different specifications, the same part. We'd like you to test this according to ASTM specification so-and-so. We'd like to have you test the same parts according to SAE specifications. And then leave it to the student. See what they come back with. That requires a student to go out on the web, pull down the ASTM specification, read the specification as to what it needs to have done to it, go down to a laboratory, perform those tests according to ASTM specifications, come back with the answer. Do the same thing for SAE specifications. Might be a slightly different test, looking at different properties, come back. But what it requires a student to do is to take general knowledge, that being, here's a specification, go find it, bring it back, follow that specification step by step, get the results, and report. I think those are the types of skills that even at the skill level we need to be incorporated, because when you have a welder go out to work, let's say for Caterpillar, you'll be asked to perform a weld according to Caterpillar specification so-and-so, and you'll have to get on that computer, pull down instructions for the weld, set the machine, go ahead and perform the weld, follow the checkups. I think that that's what they're requiring our workforce to do these days, and we need to be preparing the students in that type of manner.
So instead of just asking them to learn something, to remember something, you're asking them to discover it on their own.
That is correct.
You know, and I think that in the end, that process of discovery is what is going to motivate those students to be interested and to buy into the education process.
Well, I think the question, unless I misunderstand the question, is why are we reluctant to try to discover new things?
I'm not talking to you directly. I'm just kidding.
I understand. I understand. I think the quick and short answer to that is none of us like change. We've done this for so long, and somebody comes up with, just, for example, as simple as Wi-Fi or flip cameras or whatever the case may be. But some of us are all set in our ways, and the only thing when we hear the word change is we fear that it's got to be bad. If we hear change, it's going to be bad. Change can be a great thing. And one of the most important things that I believe can happen to anybody, and it might be a bad experience to begin with, but you will turn a bad experience into a wonderful experience, and that is step outside of your comfort zone, try something new. I mentioned flip cameras earlier. Don't be afraid to try something new. It might completely flop with your class, might be completely destroyed, but show them that you're willing to use the technology that we have today and continue to do that. I believe it's, to answer your question, I believe it's human nature. I think for most people, when they hear the word change or something different than we're accustomed to, we're stepping outside of our comfort zone, and that's all an issue for us. And we just can't let that hold us back.
I'm going to shadow a lot of what Ed just said, but at the same time, probably add to it. I don't think anybody wants to be the first one to do something, and I don't think anybody wants to jump out and do something until it's been proven by someone else. And a lot of the times, there's someone else's don't exist. You think about the shipyards and fab shops and stuff of that nature, and powerhouses and pipelines and so on. What's still the dominant process being used? Stick and TIG. Now it's starting to move into flux cores, don't get me wrong. But a lot of the processes that are being used and so on are pretty slow. And you look at other countries and you start to see what kind of processes that they're using and so on, and they're starting to move fast. Well, we have to, somebody has to step up and be the one that initiates a change or proves a process and so on, in order for us to be competitive on a global scale, if you want to look at it that way. But I think a lot of the issue is, nobody likes change. I hate it myself, and I'm stuck in my ways and my routines in many ways and so forth. But at the same time, I'm not afraid to walk across the grains either and do something that nobody else has done and watch people stare at me. And I think one of the reasons why I am like that is because of the skills program. I didn't even introduce Brad in the back. This year he's our silver medal winner, represented the United States in London, England this year, silver medal.
Yes, absolutely.
And since 1991, the World Skills Competition has been going since, this is the 41st year of an international competition. So 41 years of a competition going on an international level and so on. Since 1991, the U.S. has been able to bring home 11 medals, or 11 of us have actually gone overseas and so on. So what that kind of says is, as far as change and doing something against the grains and so on, the program's been out there forever, and people are still having a hard time accepting a youth program that gives opportunities to certain schools, individuals, and so on around the country. But it takes a few people to step out, walk across the grains to help try to change and change the opinions of people and so on. And it's people like yourselves in this classroom, leaders, taking it upon yourself to learn different things. We sit up here, we try to influence the best we can based off of what our backgrounds might be and so on. The bottom line is, I think the change part of it, the change part of it, I think is nobody wants to be the first one to do something until it's been proven and accepted.
I hope Dr. Chin appreciates this, because there is high school welding instructors out there that have the premise that we're not just trying to send all of our kids straight to work. Although we're doing that, and I have a lot of students that leave my class and within less than a week after graduation they're bringing a paycheck back in. But I believe this is paramount. As welding instructors, we have to challenge all of our students. And I talked about the student earlier that can't read. We also have, of course, the average student group. But we also have a component that most people don't even recognize, and that is the gifted or the higher level student. We need welding engineers in this country. We will always need welding engineers in this country. So if we don't challenge as welding instructors all of our students, then we're leaving a child behind, and I just simply refuse to do that. So I hope by what we're doing, and technology is giving us the one thing that has enabled us to help challenge that higher or that gifted student. So when he goes to Auburn, then Dr. Chin's, hey, we're good to go.
Excellent. Excellent. I just wanted to end, before we start taking questions from anyone that has questions in the audience, I wanted to end with one more question. I was recently with the ironworkers, and they started telling me about some of the issues they've been having with having some of their ironworkers actually go out there and find employment. We know there's a huge shortage of welders in the United States. There's about 200,000 welders that we need in the United States right now. Is there anything we could do in the classroom to start giving those kids the skill sets that they may need in order to find employment once they graduate? I know Dr. Chen talked about it a little bit, about how engineering changed at the university level. after the Challenger disaster, and how a different skill set was taught. Is that something that we need to look at in the various avenues in which we teach welding? Ed?
Well, as most people that's sitting in here today, I believe they would say, well, you know, there has to be jobs. We can't continue to graduate high school seniors or people with bachelor's degrees or doctorate degrees from universities if there's no place for them to go to work. So there has to be jobs out there. We have to be teaching life lessons. We have to be teaching literacy. We have to be teaching math. We have to be teaching science. We have to try to broaden the student as broad as we possibly can for whatever that student can find. And I don't mean to shift gears, and I hope this correlates with your question, but if, and I'm not going to jump on either side of the political bandwagon, it's just a fact of life. If we don't start replacing and modernizing our infrastructure in this country, it's going to be, if we think it's bad now, it's really, really going to be bad. So if that were to happen, we are going to be way short of the people that's needed in those jobs. And I know it's a very heated political issue right now. I understand that. The election's not quite a year away, but as you can tell on TV, it's on the other hand, well underway. So either way, either party, someone in this country is going to have to start the initiative to rebuild and modernize our infrastructure. Once that happens, it's kind of like what's going on in northwest North Dakota with the oil. I showed my students on the internet last week before I came up here, and what was interesting, it wasn't about how many jobs was available. It wasn't about the kind of money they could make. It's about little things in life. They had a deal on the internet, and is it Willington or something like that, North Dakota, I believe, is the infrastructure, but within a 70-mile radius of this town, just imagine this, a 70-mile radius of this town, they can't build houses fast enough. 70-mile radius is going to cost you $1,000 to $1,200 to park your RV. So economics comes into play. So I think there's a whole vast variety of things we can do, but back to the simple nuts and bolts of it, if there's no jobs, it's pretty hard to put somebody to work.
Can I speak to that? Just for a moment, and this might shock some of you. I just went for a level 2 upgrade in ultrasonic, and the level 3 that taught the class just returned from China, where they were building the Oakland Bay Bridge.
Yeah. The reason I asked the question originally, and I use the Bay Bridge as an example in many of my, discussions, because it's true. We outsourced it to China. We started to get pieces back in 2009. They all started to crack. We had to send them back. We had to send the American inspectors over there. It all had to be re-welded. It's not that there's a lack of jobs in the United States for welders. What it seems to me is that we have a lack of qualified welders that can do those jobs. And that's what's concerning to me. How do we change what we're doing? Because obviously there's something we're doing that's not working. How do we change that so that we can get these individuals into these jobs and qualify them to do this type of work that we're going to need, especially in the, in the next 10 years as we really have to rebuild America?
I think that's a different question than you asked a while ago. That's why you go first. Because in that same internet article about North Dakota, it said that town had like a 2.4% unemployment rate. And one of the first questions some of my students asked was, well, if there's that many jobs there, how come there's 2.4% of the people not working? Well, there's going to be at least 2.4% of people nationwide that's not going to work. whether they don't choose to work, whether they can't pass the drug test in order to work, or whether they don't have enough initiative to go to work. I mean, that's the bottom line. So I understand we have to ratchet up. We have to teach more and be more effective and put out a more well-rounded student. But at the same time, we also have to talk about social skills. And just because it's harder to go work 72 hours a week than to draw a check from the government or whatever the case may be. So there's always going to be a small percentage of people that's not going to find a job because they simply don't want to find a job. But I firmly believe that I know personally a lot of welding training organizations and locations all across this country that are putting out some fine technicians, and I know Brandon is seeing that as well. But that's just the way I see it.
Dr. Chin, do you have anything to add?
Again, if someone put up onto that welding database $75 an hour, I think you'd have a lot of respondents very quickly. So it is a market-driven force.
All right. Well, I want to open this up now in case anyone that's in the audience had any questions. I want to also encourage everyone that's here to attend the education program tomorrow and Thursday in the morning. I think that a lot of these topics we've discussed today are going to be expanded by some of the individuals that are here themselves. So we have a great program set up for the next 2 days to go even more in depth into these ideas. So if anyone has any questions, we'll take it now. Yes, sir.
Related to the individuals you have who have a hard time being able to read and so forth. We're all educators for a company, Electric Boat, that it's important that they know how to weld, but reading is a big part because they have to be able to weld procedures. We can get somebody off the street who's welded for 20 years, and is a very good welder. But he's a liability to our company because he might not be able to follow the rules or that we're required to follow.
Sure.
We have to be good welders, but we also have to be smart welders. How do you deal with something like that? How do you deal with those individuals that really don't have a hard time? I mean, are they limited in where they can go to find a job? Are some things out of reach for them then just because of that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, just like you mentioned, not only do they have to read, they also have to communicate. Right. And often, the world we live in today is heavily email. So if you would email one of these people we're talking about, you would get the email would go through. You would never get a reply back, unless they just hit reply and no subject, and they just see their signature already there. Sure, it's an absolute problem. Now, my fundamental belief is that if I have a student, like I said I did, that can't read, I think it's my job and my duty to do everything in my power to make that person as a productive citizen as I possibly can. Now, this is going to sound harsh, and I understand it's going to sound harsh, but those people are so limited in where they can go and where they can be accepted, that if that particular person can be in a place, even if it's the lower end of the pay, whatever the case may be, as long as he or she is happy, that goes to work every single day, that don't bitch and gripe, and is happy to get a paycheck to support their family, then that's really all I can ask for. But I think it would be a travesty if I said, well, son, you're not going to make it in this field, or son, I'm sorry, I can't do anything for you. Because again, we're in public education and we have to take all. The problem I have with that is, the fundamental problem I have with that is that these students in our state have an IEP that's been written at about 2nd or 3rd grade. And they've been I'm sad to say, they've been pushed through. Yes, individualized education plan, especially for that student. So they've progressed through elementary school, junior high school, now in middle school, into high school with that same IEP. Nothing's changed. The reading scores hasn't changed. The math scores haven't changed. So somebody somewhere, in my opinion, has not lived up to that individualized education plan that was written to help, initially to help that student in 2nd or 3rd grade. I don't know if I answered your question or not, but yeah, absolutely, they're restricted. Sure.
You're in a spot where, like you said, you have to accept it, whereas.
Absolutely, right. You don't have to pay them.
We have to at some point cut them loose.
Sure, that's right. That's right.
Yes, sir.
I was just going to further comment that I believe we still have an industry where there are a variety of level of skill sets that even a person that is functionally illiterate still can succeed and still can make living wage money in this trade. Whereas, again, if we're able to help them along and help them grow along the way, we have a variety of tools that we have in our state where we're integrating basic skills in with trade skills. And I don't know if all the states have that, but we're able to help those students with their math and their reading along with the welding skill set. And it's had troubles, but it's been very beneficial to our students as well.
Well, some of these kids that we just talked about.
These aren't just kids, though, and I hate to break it.
No, I understand. I understand. Well, these kids become adults.
Yes.
But I guess my point is, just a quick example with math. Several years ago, in our state, we stopped doing basic math, and when I say basic math, I mean addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. As far as like I was taught, I had to memorize my multiplication tables in order to survive. But now it's all about a calculator function. Okay, so I'm going somewhere with this. So when I get that student that's challenged in math, and when we're able to teach that student how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide fractions, after we teach them how to read a tape measure, and then we have them add, subtract, multiply, and divide fractions from tape measure increments that's real and applied, then you see the light come on. So we absolutely do raise their math, and we do a lot of work with literacy. So you're right. There's definitely things that we work on to try to raise that student's ability in whatever it may be.
The greatest things is when you hear, oh.
Yeah. Or why didn't they show me that? You know. Yeah.
In 5th grade.
Right. Right.
So we're up against the end of this session, so I think I could take one more question if anyone else has one. Yes, sir.
Yeah, heard a lot of people, we've seen out on the show floor that, simulation is something that's here and it's something that's probably going to expand into the future. Clearly the machine Lincoln has is head and shoulders above the other stuff that I've seen, not to put down the other stuff, but it's clearly the best one out there at this point. I see the AWS, their role is is there some way to get like Lincoln Electric and somebody like Sony or Nintendo talking together to take their knowledge in welding and their simulation and what they've done and try to simplify it, bring down the cost to it so that one could sit on somebody's living room floor, that your 3-year-old son could play with this and imagine someday becoming a welder, as well as approaching and taking care of the problem that myself and many other instructors have is, I don't have $50,000 to buy one of the machines, and there's no way I'm going to come up with $5 or $6 grand per year to support that on an ongoing basis. Is there some future in something like that and bringing the
Absolutely.
cost down to a reasonable
Absolutely.
level? Because I would love to have what they have, but there's this barrier there that I just cannot get over and get to it. So it's like looking through a chain link fence. It's some kind of wonderful thing, but I can't get at it.
If you look at, there's a, I wish I had a projector to be able to show you, but there's something called the curve of technological adaptation, you know, and basically it shows how any new technology, when it's introduced into society, takes a little while to reach a point in which it can be integrated into a majority of that society. And we're, you know, when we're talking about virtual reality, we're still talking about the fact that this is in the very early stages. You know, we're still in the very early stages. These machines are only starting to become available. But AWS is taking this very seriously. And I hope my boss doesn't see this, because I'm going to tell you something. To me, there is nothing more important to what we do than helping students and educators. Because the simple fact is that we may not want to admit it, but we are an industry in crisis. And in 15 years, this industry cannot exist in the United States. It's a very, very real possibility that welding as an industry will have died in 15 years if we don't change the trends that currently exist. And so we're working very diligently at AWS to do that. We partnered up with Lincoln. Lincoln has been kind enough to donate, I believe, 5 VR machines. We built a trailer for it. That trailer is now going to be traveling around the United States, taking it to schools and to events, allowing kids to go in there and have that simulated experience. But we're taking it even further. In April of this year, the American Welding Society released American Welding Online, which is really our online learning community. It's still in the very early stages, but it's being quickly built out. Over the next 18 to 24 months, we're going to have a great deal of support for students, for instructors, for parents, for welders out there, making it available to them, not just in paid certification seminars in which they can improve the quality of their resume, but also in just complementary resources that can be used in the classroom or used by individual welders who want to improve their skills. Things like math skills for welders. You know, we're going to be putting out some classes for that. We've also talked about, actually, we have a meeting when we get back from Chicago to start discussing our strategy for phone apps. You know, we have a great number of ideas, some of which are just fun. You know, of apps that can be put on any smartphone, again, to promote this idea of welding, to make it more interesting to the younger generations. So you're going to see a lot of stuff coming out of American Welding Online in the next 2 years as it starts to grow. And what we're really hoping is that it's going to be a place where, as it's already been discussed with a lot of the major manufacturers in this country, where everyone can come together, you know, to share the knowledge we have, to share the resources we have, and really create the front line for our battle for our industry.
Well, one quick thing just to throw out, and I don't know if it'll help or not, but I think it's worth mentioning. And I agree. Most of you sitting here would probably say, well, even if I could afford X amount of VTECs at $50,000, I still wouldn't implement them all and do away with what I do now. So we can all agree, probably at least at our level, at the high school level, that we could not do that. But if it would help get one in your school, and I don't work for Lincoln Electric. They're not going to write me a check for selling one of these, nor would I take it if they offered. But because it's green, doesn't use any electricity, doesn't put off any fume, doesn't do any of that, there is grants available, and that's where Dr. Chin and the people at the universities do a wonderful job of writing grants to get federal monies to support green technology, just like what the Fabtech is. So now, if you could get a grant from the government that would purchase the machine, and then it's much easier to say, well, I think I can come up with that $5,000 a year to help maintain it then. Just a thought.
One parting thought for all educators is that the concept of portfolios, particularly for skill training. We recommend that all engineers these days have what we call a portfolio, similar to an artist. Similar for skill workers. Take a picture, put it on your iPhone or whatever it is, generate a portfolio of what you have done. And that will help you in the job market competing.
All right, thank you very much everyone for coming. I want to thank these three gentlemen for taking their time to be with us today.